Greetings, African people. Greetings, melanated black people. My name is Lefera Cholo, Emendra Dajet, Pata Otep, Akera Anka. Today we are presenting excerpts from the book The Falsification of African Consciousness by our great mind, our African scholar, our master teacher, our revered ancestor, Dr. Amos N. Wilson. May he rest in power and in our hearts. The subtitle, Why Study History? I quote, "The study of history cannot be a mere celebration of those who struggled on our behalf. We must be instructed by history and should transform history into concrete reality, into planning and development, into construction of power and the ability to ensure our survival as a people. If not, Black History Month becomes an exercise in the inflation of egos. It becomes an exercise that cuts us further off from reality. Ironically, we now see even other people who are not our friends joining us in this celebration, which means that they must see in it some means of protecting their own interest and see in it something that works for them, possibly against us. If they can celebrate our history and see it as something positive, then it means that we are not using it in a revolutionary sense. They do not see our study of it as a threat to their power. If we are not studying it in a way that it is a threat to their power, then we are studying it incorrectly. And our celebration of it is helping to maintain us in the state of deception. So let us make sure we look at and study history in a light such that it advances our interests, not inflates our ego and blinds us to reality. Now, let's look at European history and what I call historiography and oppression, its functions and outcome. By historiography, I refer to the writing of history. We see in many of today's newspapers and popular media that many people are complaining about the state of the study of history. The fact that it's not being studied that much in the high schools, or that Western civilization is not being studied enough. Now we see a number of universities and colleges reinstituting as part of the core curricula the study of Western civilization. I am sure some of us are familiar with the controversies that are going on, because the feminist movement is even saying the feminist history should be injected into the study of the so-called Western civilization. Of course, African advocates are also demanding that African history and non-Western civilization be included in this area. Subtitle: Socio-political role of historiography. We have an issue here that I call the projection and image of history. History has been downplayed in this society. History has a poor reputation. Often it is looked upon by too many people as essentially a set of dates and events. People ask, why should I study these dates? Why should I study these events? What does it have to do with today? It is as if they say, okay, it might be used to explain how some things came about in today's world, but probably we could live without it. Often history, among even many of our people, even the so-called Black history itself, have been looked upon as irrelevant and unprofitable. This idea is, why study Black history? It's not going to make me any money. It's not going to get me a job. What can I do with it? You should get yourself a degree in computer science and get yourself a trade. I'm not interested in black power. I'm interested in green power. These statements express foolish concepts. When we hear them, we recognize that the individual has not seen the connection between history, power, and money. There is a direct connection between history and economics. I often say in this regard that if there were not any direct relationship between history and money, and a direct relationship between history and power, history and rulership, history and domination, then why is it that the European rewrote history? Why is it that the European wants to take our history away from us? Why is it that the European wants to rewrite our history and distort it? Why is it that he does not want to present it at all? Apparently, the rewriting, the distortion, the stealing of our history must serve a vital economic, political, and social functions for the European, or else he will not bother or try so hard to keep our history away from us, to distort it in our minds. Let us meditate on these issues. And I think we'll come to realization that there is a direct relationship between history and economics, political and social development. Subtitle: History and Psychology. History is projected in this culture as being irrelevant. I don't think by accident. Again, if it is made to look irrelevant, if it is made to look unprofitable, then making it appear making it appear so must serve some profitable purpose. When a course in a college or university are apparently presented non-politically or objectively, neutrally, they are actually presented in the most political way. We must understand that it is the nature of this racist culture to hide its political agenda. It is in the nature of this racist culture to hide its political agenda. Therefore, it presents so-called facts and information as if they have no political connection or implication. I often try to show how making something politically creates knowledge and information that can be of a great value. I often use the concept of the Skinner rat to show how that concept is presented non-politically in the psychology of learning. How a rat is put in a box, can only eat if it performs a particular behavior. So if it pushes a lever, it is only as a result of pushing that lever that it is allowed to eat. The experimenter determines when this rat is going to eat and when it is going to drink. He determines the living condition under which this rat must survive. The rat becomes conditioned and changes as a result of the fact that the man has a control of vital things in his life. Thus, we can present this paradigm in a very sterile way in terms of learning and reinforcement principles. We can write a whole book about them with graphs, languages, and the whole bit. I often point how black students can learn Skinnerian psychology better than a white student, and still, as a result of having learned it, be made dumb by it. because it is taught on a race-neutral, non-political level. But I often ask my students whether there is only one way of looking at this situation. Why not look at this politically? The red is conditioned. The red is conditioned, i.e., it reflects the conditions under which it is forced to survive as a result of a set of power relations. So why not analyze this experiment in terms of power relations? Based on these terms, we may reach the conclusion that the conditioned red is socially created. Its personality is a social creation. What it learns is the result of a power differential between the red and the experimenter. Because the experimenter has a power over the red and uses the power to transform and create something new in the red. As a result of conditioning experiment, the red is different from other unconditioned reds. It shows the effect of its conditioning. The experimenter is able to do this because the experimenter has a control over the red's circumstances. If we go further and identify with the red, we can begin to learn something about ourselves, something of value. We will then have grasped something that can lay the foundation for revolution and change, not a sterile bit of knowledge and information. I often ask my student, who has a control of your food? Who has a control of your electricity? Who has a control of your water, of your jobs? Who tells you what to wear when you go to work? Who tells you when to come to work, when to leave, when to go to lunch, how to speak, how to write, how to do this and how to do that? How are these things taught and how they are conditioned? It is by reward and punishment. It is by reward and punishment. You do this, you get paid. You don't do this, you don't get paid. You get a raise, you get docked. What do we have here? We see the same basic situation, the same basic principle for the conditioning of rats are now transformed to life and reality in itself. Therefore, to live in the ghetto under the power of another people is to be created by that people. To be rewarded and punished by the people is to be created by that people. What would happen if these ghettos we lived in today were surrounded by a force that blocks food and the water, cuts off electricity, and the other things. What kind of situation would we be in? But even with water coming in, food coming in, we are still created and conditioned by the circumstances under which we live. We are living under them as a result of the exercise of power of another people over us. Therefore, if we wish to change this situation, i.e., the conditions under which we live, then we must change the power relationships. If we are to prevent ourselves from being created by another people and are to engage in the act of self-creation, then we must change the power relations. With the political approach to Skinner's Red, the African student not only learns what the white student learns, but learns more and learns something of value to himself. What he learns becomes a basis for self-understanding and knowledge, a plan for the future, and a means by which he or she can change his or her situation. Without this lesson being taught in this way, we will have a bunch of educated people who wonder why we cannot get out of the condition that we are in. We thus produce a bunch of educated people. As I have expressed before, the more degrees they get in business administration, the fewer the business they have to administer. Who, as they go into colleges and School of Finances, Harvard School of Finance, etc., find their communities being inundated by Asians and other groups. Apparently, their degrees are not designed for them to control their own economic situations and circumstances. But because the information in those courses, in the economics are seen as neutral and non-political. The student is more radically politicized than any other way. An African-centered education recognizes that the whole of human life is a political system. An African-centered education recognizes that the whole of human life is a political system. Therefore, it interprets its materials politically. It is through political, economical, and military action that we must change our circumstances. If those things are not applied in the context of our education, then we are being educated just to be servants. Educated servants, because it is the intention of Europeans that blacks never escape their condition of servitude. It is the intention of Europeans that blacks never escape their condition of servitude. A higher education means that we will just be educated servants, nothing more, nothing less. Hence, we have to look at our situation politically and socially. Hence, we have to look at our situation politically and socially. So when history is projected as irrelevant, as unprofitable, as a system of dates and events, as a system of rarefied causes and effects, it is projected that way, I think, because it helps to maintain the political, social status quo, because it serves a political, economic function. People who are historic, who have little knowledge of history, are people who are more gullible, more easily manipulated, people who can be more easily adapted to the capitalist machinery than people who are historically knowledgeable. History can become a basis for self-criticism, a basis for self-understanding, and more importantly, the basis for understanding of the motives and the psychology of others. When history is not taught appropriately, we are left to just follow orders, to just dredge to our work, our jobs, without knowing the reason why. Yet dredging to our job has not secured our future at all. We must recognize that merely going to work, merely studying computer science, merely going to office is not enough. We are going to have to understand the psychology of the people who runs this world. We can only understand our oppressors' psychology by understanding their history. They rob us of a knowledge of history and want us to think that history is irrelevant and unimportant, so that we cannot see through their deadly games. We must recognize that history is at the center of life. We must recognize that history is at the center of life. Unquote. May these words of wisdom resonate with every black person in this world. Please buy the books of Dr. Amos Wilson. They are a fountain of African wisdom and knowledge. See the link in the description below. Ang Oja Snap, Ang Oja Snap, Ang Oja Snap, Dua, 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 Normal, 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 Shem Hotep, Shem Hotep, Shem Hotep, Asante Sana.